Hello everyone, thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome to the second day of the conference. I hope you've dried out from yesterday. I'm sure that's not the normal weather here in Newcastle. Let's see. Okay, well thank you very much for coming for this first session. Sometimes a little bit difficult after the conference dinner. We're going to have a panel discussion for the next hour, which obviously you'll be contributing significantly by asking your questions and hopefully also engaging in the discussion and around about the shaping the library of the future. And we've got three distinguished panellists who are going to hopefully add some provocative points into the discussion. Shortly, I'll ask each of them to do a quick 5-minute presentation highlighting some of the key things they wish to bring to our attention. But before that, I would quickly like them to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Colleen.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm Colleen Campbell from the Max Planck Digital Library in Munich, Germany.
My name is Simone Kortekaas, and I work as head of collection and information management at the Library of Wageningen University and Research, which is in the Netherlands. For those of you who know where Utrecht is in the Netherlands, Wageningen is 30 kilometers to the east, more to the German, in the direction of the German border. Well,
okay,
that's it.
Lovely. Hello, everyone. I'm David White. I'm not from a library. I'm head of digital learning at the University of the Arts London, which is in London. So, just in case you were wondering.
So where's that situated?
Yes, just down the road.
Okay, good. Okay, well, we'll do the 5-minute presentation. I think Colleen's going to be first, so would you like to kick us off?
And since I understand there were actually, there might have been 4 of us on the panel session, but since there are 3, I'm going to take a little liberty and have probably a little bit more than 5 minutes, so I ask your patience. So on my flight here to Newcastle, I was thinking about this panel session, but put down my laptop for landing and picked up my book and was struck by a particular passage I read in that moment. It's a novel by Paul Auster called Moon Palace, and in it, the young protagonist, Marco Fogg, wanting to reassure his dying employer about the stability of his immediate future, lies that he's been accepted to library school at Columbia University. He says, "I admit it's strange, but I think I might be suited for it. Libraries aren't in the real world, after all. They're places apart, sanctuaries of pure thought. In that way, I can go on living on the moon for the rest of my life." With so much transition happening in our libraries, wouldn't it be nice to live on the moon for a while? Or maybe instead, we should think about shooting for the moon. I was invited to give the perspective of the Max Planck Digital Library, or just MPDL as we call it, on the key issues and trends which will impact the future of libraries. But the best way to go about this, I think, is to consider what impact do we as libraries want to have on the future? There are more than 9,000 scientists in over 80 fields, ranging from classical antiquities to systems biology at the Max Planck Institutes, spread across Germany and the world, pushing the frontiers of knowledge. At MPDL, the team where I work is called Information Provision, which means we support the efforts of wherever they are, of our researchers, providing them with the best possible electronic resources, ensuring the institution receives the best value for their investment, just like all of you. But with the scholarly communications landscape changing all around us, how can we ensure we continue to provide value in the future? Our researchers are great consumers of content, so at MPDL, we're investing our time and energies now to provide them with a future that is based on open access to the world's scholarly outputs. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But they are also great producers of content, publishing around 12,000 articles a year. And looking closely at those publications, we found that the most dynamic area of growth in their article output is in open access publications. And do you know which publisher showed the greatest level of growth in OA articles by our researchers last year? Not PLOS, not Biomed Central, or Copernicus, not even Scope 3. Nature Publishing Group, a traditional commercial publisher. What does that mean for libraries and our future? We see this as an opportunity. Open access publication is growing exponentially, but this does not mean that our acquisitions budgets will diminish, nor that the notion of procurement will disappear. We just need to broaden the concept. The budgets that we handle are too massive to be spent on read access privileges alone. Just as the publishers are now redefining themselves in preparation for a purely open scholarly communications environment, we as libraries will no longer be content providers, but service providers. We are already aggregators of the strategic interests of our institutions, and moving forward, we will consolidate that role to be the sole point of contact for formulating those strategic interests in negotiations, in defining service level agreements and standards. For us at MPDL, providing value in the future means taking on responsibility now for the negotiation and management of all the software licenses of our institution, the agreements with Microsoft and Oracle, for example. Our IT departments have higher technology competency, but they do not have our expertise in translating the needs of our researchers into service-level agreements. Expanding our scope to IT is not a revolution, but merely the evolution of our role in electronic resource management. Providing value in the future means moving out of the library as a place and into the labs and out on the field, one-on-one with our researchers, anticipating their needs. This does not require huge amounts of interaction, but quality time. Researchers are very busy people. They need us to provide them with new solutions to make their work more efficient. We're constantly testing and offering new services to our researchers, like research data storage tools, tools for data enrichment, organizing and sharing. We just offered a new app to transfer scientific data like photos, audio and video files from an Android device when they're out on the field to our image repository that has an OCR function to describe and annotate the files. We have a new electronic laboratory notebook software that allows scientists to record lab experiments directly into a digital lab notebook and share their work with collaborators around the world. Providing value means improving our analytics and reporting tools to enable us to demonstrate to our institution that we make good use of the money allocated to us. It means asking ourselves, what exactly are the value indicators that we're using when spending our money, and how are they changing? How does the importance of a journal change when you compare its usage statistics with how many articles your researchers publish in it, or how many times it is cited in the articles? Over the past few years, we have seen Taylor and Francis drop from the top 20 publishers in terms of our research outputs, displaced by PLOS. Does that not say something about the value our researchers place on Taylor and Francis? And should we not think about strategically when we consider where we are spending our money? If we look at those top 20 publishers in terms of research output, and that corresponds to around 80% of our outputs, 5 of these are pure OA publishers. With this ratio, we simply cannot afford not to have a strategic approach and take ownership of the institutional relationships with these publishers. Only by getting our arms around all the revenue streams flowing to publishers will we be able to begin looking at controlling the costs of scholarly communications. So for the 15 traditional publishers in that top 20, we've put in place a roadmap to move them to transitional agreements that take into consideration the growing revenues they receive from our institutions through their open access publishing, be it in pure OA or so-called hybrid journals, so that by 2020, we will have no traditional subscription agreements in place and can move on to the next phase of the transition to open access. Our researchers want their content to be open and reusable immediately upon publication, and they want to continue to publish with the journals of their choice. We want the cost behind their dissemination to be transparent and economically sustainable. So on a broader scale, the Max Planck Digital Library is coordinating the OA 2020 initiative as a global effort to transform the existing corpus of scholarly journals from subscription-based to open access by converting resources currently spent on journal subscriptions into funds that support OA business models. Many of you will have read Liam Ernie's article on offsetting in UKSG Insights last March, and many of you participated in his fringe discussion yesterday. The comments following his talk all centered on the need for librarians, the need librarians feel to think strategically. And I invite you to think about the impact you want to make on the scholarly communication system. From our perspective at MPDL and that of the scores of institutions across 26 countries that have committed to the principles of the OA 2020 initiative, absolute success will come when institutions are no longer investing in content behind paywalls. That may seem like a lofty ambition, but we are building that future. The Max Planck Institute for Solar System Research is studying the modal mineralogy of the moon's surface. So if we want to bring value to our institutions now and in the future, it seems only logical to shoot for the moon. Thank you.
Thank you. Simone?
A little more about Wageningen, because I told you where it is situated in the Netherlands. But I would like to add to it that there are approximately 10,000 students, 5,000 scientists, and they are studying and doing research on life sciences and environmental sciences. So then you have a bit of a picture where I come from. I have been invited to your SCONUL conference because in 2011 I did a presentation at the Liber conference with a provocative title, Thinking the Unthinkable, a library without a catalogue. I stated that offering a local catalogue for discovery of information was no longer useful because our users were already out there on the web finding their way to our licensed journals through larger and stronger search engines like Google Scholar, freely available on the internet and containing massive amounts of scientific information. We also saw an increase of the use of databases we paid for, such as Scopus or Web of Science. I still try to convince all my library colleagues in the world and also in my own organization, that we have to get rid of the idea that our users will start their information quest within the boundaries of a local library. We will have to meet our students and scholars where they are, on the web, working and studying in a global environment. A provocative title for a presentation today would be Thinking the Unthinkable, a library without its own collection. Actually, this is not mere science fiction. The situation in the Netherlands is that 13 university libraries spend most of their collection budget at licensing the same journals. Although at this moment we still have our own license and access administration, I can already see a nearby future where we organize things more efficiently, offering one digital collection to all Dutch university students and scholars. Yesterday, I heard that 7 Irish universities already put together their acquisition budgets and just did it. And despite of the difficulties we are facing in respect to turn to open access publishing, I still think that this is the way we will have to go. And this too will have major impact on the work we are doing now around licenses and access administration. And we can even go further. Oops. I'm very much in favor of what Lorcan Dempsey calls the collective collection, an inventory of what is available in libraries worldwide. No more boundaries, no more local silos, and a stable and secure alternative for the Googles of this world. If what used to be the biggest part of our work is organized globally in the future, will there still be a role for libraries within universities? I very much believe that librarians more and more become part of the workflows of students and scientists. We will make research of these scholars findable and accessible on the web in a sustainable way. As libraries, we have a very strong brand of over 400 years old. We were and still are at the heart of scientific information, although the surroundings and organizational forms have been changing and will change in the future. Maybe the library organization as it exists today will disappear. Maybe we will have just one library organization in the Netherlands in the future. Maybe my university will become part of a different organization. Maybe scholars and students will work in a kind of loose network organizations. But whatever organizational form we will evolve to, there will be students and scientists who study and work in these new environments. We as librarians will build our workflows around theirs. We will be their metadata, data and information stewards. We will gather information, add metadata to what our scholars are producing, secure it for the future, give access to as many people as possible, guide and educate new generations of students to scientific information, not only in searching and finding, but also in producing and managing their own output. We will link them and their output together, because we as librarians are used to working together, to find links, to see new opportunities and ways to gather and access information. With the digitization of scientific information, with the web, the globalization, we as librarians add our expertise to make it work better for students and scientists, adapt our organization and work in such a way that we will be a natural part of their study and research. This will be the way we will shape our library of the future. Thank you.
David?
Okay, thank you. I think I can pick up from where you've left off there in some senses. So, yes, I'm at University of the Arts London, which means I work with Pat, who's our library director, and I used to work with Leo, but he defected to Goldsmiths recently. But, you know, congratulations, that's all good. So, yes, I'm head of digital learning, so I come from outside of the library's culture, and my focus tends to be on teaching and learning, which is a big part of what my institution does, and I suspect it's a large part of what many of your institutions do. So what I want to do is to propose a kind of thought experiment, if you like, which is to imagine, it's sort of a deliberately extreme view. Well, you can decide for yourself if you think it is, but to imagine a near future where all content is available freely online and it's all digital, okay? So everybody can get to everything online, okay? And the other aspect to that I'd like to sort of raise is to sort of not get too focused on this difference between digital and physical resources. Let's just imagine it's all stuff, okay? And some of it's physical and some of it's digital, but actually what's more important is the value of it to the people who are trying to use it rather than its format. I think sometimes we're kind of obsessed by form rather than the actual substance of it. So I had this interesting situation with a student that I was interviewing as part of research, and he'd been told by his tutors that he had to include what he called a certain amount of hard copy sources in his bibliography, okay? And it took me a while to figure out what a hard copy source was. What he meant was books, all right? But what was interesting was the reason he'd called them hard copy sources was, from his perspective, all information was digital, of which a small amount had been inconveniently printed out and put on a shelf, which meant he had to go somewhere and find it, okay? But it was intriguing to me that his tutor had made that distinction, said, actually, I don't want you just to give me digital sources, I want you to have hard copy sources. Why? I don't know. And so those are the two things that I want to put in front of you. Let's imagine a world, okay, where everything is available. So I don't actually understand open access. It's a weird thing to me. I'm like, well, how come everything isn't open access already? Do you know, how could that even be a thing? In my world, everything is just out there. So let's imagine everything's open access and it's all digital. So the question then I would ask is what's the value of a library that owns no content? So you were talking about a library that has no collection. What's the value of a library in this near future that doesn't own any content, okay? And I think the answer from my perspective is actually really positive. And I saw, because I was following the hashtag, that was some of this discussion yesterday. The answer is expertise, okay? And I think that that's what's important in libraries in the near future, is to see the library as a source of expertise. And the kind of expertise that I'm talking about, and I know that this is what students value, is curation, the ability to teach and help people with critical evaluation, and also relevance, okay? So that's my view of the near future, is this shift away from owning and managing content, not entirely, but to a large extent, and towards that idea of expertise. And again, something that I saw going on yesterday in discussions was this sense of what does the library mean in terms of student experience? Okay, and I think this shift from content to expertise is actually a really positive direction in terms of how the library can be framed as of value within that higher education culture that is about student experience, okay? And overall, and I did sort of warn you at the start that most of what I think about is teaching and learning. Overall, I think this would be a shift towards teaching and learning. So that's my pitch, if you like, is we imagine a near future where everything's open access, everything's digital, clearly it won't all be digital, that allows libraries to shift towards a model of expertise. And that expertise is actually a form of teaching and learning, which means that libraries become all the more relevant to your institutions in a really, really positive way. That's my bit.
Right. Thank you, David. Okay, so we've heard some interesting proposals about disruptions to our standard business models that we've been carefully working on for the last few years. All of our subscription funds to be put into OA publishing, thinking strategically about our impact on scholarly communication, a library without a catalogue moving to a library without a collection, organisational changes where there are scientists and students, but not necessarily our long-existing organisations. And then the shift of our emphasis, if all our activities, from content to expertise. And that our future is in our expertise rather than our long-cherished collections. So, I would hope that's raised a few questions and comments you'd like to make from our panel. So we have the roving microphones. So either questions or comments for our three distinguished speakers. Who would like to be the first? Can't be. There we go. Okay, could you state your name and institution?
Gavin Boyce, University of Sheffield. Thank you very much, Pan. That was very interesting for me. Can I paraphrase your summary a bit more? So, in the future, librarians are going to be contract negotiators, or, shall we say, teachers, learners, or teachers and learning, and/or the middle one, which is quite interesting, promoters.
And/or, sorry, catch that.
Promoters.
Promoters.
Promoters of research, marketeers, if you will. So that's my paraphrase. Are you all happy that librarians are going to be all three, or are you not happy with the positions of your colleagues on this?
Okay, thank you. I think the question in essence is that the future here is librarians are either going to be contract negotiators, teachers, or promotion of research. And can librarians do all this, or do they focus on individual ones? So who would like to pick that one up first?
I'll start.
Colleen?
Yeah, absolutely. We will be doing all three. We already are doing all three. So there's no reason not to continue to do all three. That libraries are already doing outreach. They're already teaching. They are already preserving for the long term the content that is in our hands. So I see, yes, all the roles continuing.
Okay. Any others?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that sometimes, especially, let's say, where the digital is concerned, there's this sense that all library roles need to be going in a particular direction. But I think that the nature of the roles is diverse, and it should remain diverse. And that the remit of the library will be multifaceted, despite what I'm saying about the thought experiment. So I don't see one person being able to do all those things, but I also don't see the library role becoming kind of a mono thing at all. It has to point, it has to point in a number of directions. I think perhaps where the shift maybe needs to take place is a sort of certain sense of agility or ability to evolve those roles. I mean, speaking from somebody who's outside of the libraries and in a kind of emergent area, I'm always quite surprised at how specific library roles are. And I think that can make it difficult for libraries to respond to a changing environment. Although, I have to say that often when you look at a higher education institution, the library is one of the most innovative places, actually, and one of the most responsive places, but they don't necessarily talk about it in those terms. So, for me, it's not necessarily about the specific shape of the roles, it's more a kind of overall flexibility to evolve roles as the environment changes and as needs change.
Sorry?
I think actually this is the most interesting part of our jobs, that the world around us is constantly changing, and we are constantly, with the expertise and knowledge we have, we constantly try to stay part of it. Last week, a new employee of mine started her work, and the first chat I had with her, she's a scientist actually, so she's not a librarian, but I talked about the fantastic job we have, and the reason why I think it's a fantastic job is exactly this constant change, this constant looking around what's happening in the world around us, working together with colleagues all over the world, trying to link things together, trying to find new ways. What a fantastic job is that. I think it's the most beautiful job you can have.
Yes, that's quite interesting, because quite a lot of us, when we get back to base, our staff say, actually, there's too much change going on. Can we please slow things down a little bit? So I think there's a tension there between some staff and others on that.
Yeah,
you can
definitely.
Comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen that in terms of when I've asked to come into libraries and run workshops around the digital. Is that for me? I mean, this is a very kind of basic way of putting it, but there seem to be two sort of approaches to work. One of them was people who had a very distinct idea of what their role was, and they do that, and they do that very well, but they had a very deliberate edge to it. That didn't mean that they wouldn't go outside of it, but they'd consider it as going outside of it, if you see what I mean. And then there were other characters who would normally respond to the kind of workshops I was doing with more enthusiasm. And their attitude was, what do I need to do today to make this place work? You know, that's how they approached their job. And and you could see there was a real distinction there. Now, on reflection, I realized that it came down to how people constructed what they thought it meant to be professional. And I'm used to an environment where what it means to be professional is to be incredibly adaptive and agile to deal with whatever's coming at you. But I totally appreciate that for some people, what it means to be professional is to understand their role, the shape of it, and to just do it really well. And I think that that's very, very important. And so, you go back to your institution, and perhaps people say, "Oh, there's too much change," or "It's going too fast." The way I look at it is that there'll be people within your library who enjoy change. And there'll be people within the library who actually, they just want to make sure that things are done well and they're solid. And you need both. You need both. So I think that's what's important, is to find ways of valuing both those approaches rather than trying to make everybody respond to change all the time.
Either you want to pick, Simone? No? Okay, good. Has the questioner still got the microphone? So I'd like to ask what your view of is whether we can do all three.
Yes. Good answer. We can do all three, or at least many can do all three. The issue, and many are already doing all three in many universities, the issue becomes one of the perception within institutions of the library's role. When you are performing this many functions, sometimes it can be hard to keep the message simple as to what you are actually doing. Yeah. So you're taking on part of the negotiation for the IT, you're taking part of promotion away from public engagement, you're taking etc., etc. So it's a smearing of the functions across the university. Be interesting to see how universities deal with that in the future.
Yes. Probably slowly, as they usually do, but anyway, okay, thank you very much. That was a very, very good question, comment. Liz, I think, just by the microphone, fortunately, as well.
Hello, thank you all. That was really, really interesting. Can I ask you all, and linking back to some of the discussion that we had yesterday, the Library of the Future has to be an integral part of the University of the Future. Mm-hmm. So what do you think librarians should be doing to ensure that their services are integral to the learning, teaching, and research activities of their institutions in the future?
Okay, so thank you. So the question is, what do libraries need to do to make sure their service is integral to the development of learning and teaching and research at their institutions? So who would like to start with that one? Simone?
Well, yesterday, at the end of the day, there was a presentation about a survey that has been done, talking to vice-chancellors of a few universities, asking them what they thought about the library. While they were explaining what kind of answers they got, I was thinking on how it works in my organization. We have very close contact with a lot of layers inside the university. And that's really, really necessary. So you don't only have contact with these individual students or groups of students or individual scientists or groups of scientists, but you have to be sure that you have contact and share information with every key person you have in your institution. And sometimes key persons, well, I don't know if that's a good English word, but sometimes key persons are formal leaders or formal members of management. But there are, in every organization, there are also a lot of informal people who matter to the issue. And what we try to do in my organization is, well, build a kind of map of the complete university organization and point out where we have this very important context and where there are gaps. Because we constantly have the feeling that we have to inform them about what we are doing and why, and check if that's what they want us to do, if it fits with their strategic plans. Not only with a strategic plan of the university, but also faculty or smaller groups. So that's something, well, yesterday the first speaker, I forgot her name, she talked about relation management. Well, that's the kind of relation management you have to do. You have to talk to all your stakeholders, all the people who do matter in this case.
Thank you.
We were actually talking yesterday about the concept of surprise and delight, and that's something that we also try to keep present. Exactly, it's all about finding who are the decision makers in any area of our organization, and ensuring that we have relationships with them, and finding what will surprise and delight them. So for the researchers, it's proposing a new tool that they had no idea existed. But for the directors of the institutes, it might be providing them with the publication data. I mean, they have no idea where they're publishing, actually. So if you can give them some analytics, they're going to be really excited about that. Yeah.
So, okay, slightly secondary school. Hands up who considers there something to do with running a library service in this room. It's not a trick question. Right. So well, you're great. So I think that's a problem, that language, okay, in terms of the way that it works in framing the value of the library within an institution. And it's the word service that I struggle with. Because what happens is that immediately sets up this scenario whereby what the institution does happens somewhere over there, and you kind of service it. Not a great phrase, okay? And I'm much more interested, I mean, this is something that came out of us developing the strategy at UAL. And I much prefer the idea of partnership or something that's more kind of collegiate in terms of the language. Because otherwise you end up in a scenario whereby you're sort of saying, well, okay, you're the institution and you're going to move into the future. And what we will do is we will do whatever we can to help you with whatever you're doing over there. But I think it's really important that libraries frame themselves as integral to the institution, as an absolutely fundamental part of the institution, not as something that services something happening elsewhere. And I remember somebody saying to me, I thought this was really interesting, that everybody, no matter where they're located in a university, for example, feels like they're not at the core of what the university does. Everybody says, oh, I'm a bit at the edge, or I'm a bit in the middle, or I run a course, but actually it's over here. And I think we've just got to get beyond that and say, you know what, the way that we operate is in a service mode, but we're not a service in that sense. We are integral. And I think part of what that means is making your expertise visible. I know in our libraries there is an enormous amount of expertise. The library is absolutely central to making our institution work in terms of that expertise. But it's not a form of expertise that's easy to quantify or that is necessarily shouted about or is necessarily that visible. So I think there's those two things. Be careful about that concept of service, and find ways of making visible the expertise that you actually contribute to the institution as an integral part of the institution.
Okay, thanks. David, have you got any thoughts about how we might make our expertise visible?
Yeah, do more stuff online. So I think one of the advantages is that if you use the digital spaces as a point of engagement with your users or clients or whatever you want to call them, then that because it's online, you can actually see those engagements taking place, if you see what I mean. And so it makes those moments of engagement quite visible. So you get the double advantage of providing a new sort of mechanism for engagement, but also it's quite a visible mechanism. And just generally finding ways of capturing and talking about that expertise that is beyond the language of service.
Any comments on that from one of the other two?
Yes, well, I'm thinking about, well, you mentioned partnerships or being a partner, being integrated in things that happen around scientists or students. I think that too is a way to show your expertise. Be part of trying something new together with a group of scientists, trying to find out new ways. And if you are a part of this group, if you can really integrate into this group, you can show your expertise.
Anything to add?
Yeah, looking for ways to anticipate the needs, anticipate the questions before the researchers even know they had a need, you know. The last time I actually work from my home, and the last time I was at the digital library in Munich, which is just an office, right? It could be an insurance building. It doesn't really matter because most of the work is virtual and behind the scenes. But there was one of the librarians or one of the staff had a drone, and so hooked up her smartphone to the drone and shot it up, and to test out a tool that we would be providing to the researchers. So, yeah, pushing those boundaries and looking for something new to go and present to the researchers.
Right, okay. Thank you for that, Toz. A question here at the front. The microphone is on its way. It's behind you, as they say.
Hello, Phil Sykes from Liverpool University, and thanks for the presentations. They were great. You described the way in which we're moving from being primarily about content to being primarily about expertise and mediation. But I think you've characterised us as being a little way down the road at the beginning of a journey, whereas I think we're nearly all the way down the road at the end of the journey. If you look at what we pay people to do, which is a very nuts and bolts way of examining what libraries actually do, comparatively little of it goes on procuring and making available content. And if it wasn't for the existence of books and the need to process and reshelve them, hardly any of it would go on that. Most of the non-book jobs really are about advice, expertise, and customer care. Even in terms of the behind-the-scenes work that libraries do, if you were to take books away, we'd have more people, for example, at Liverpool, working on organising the research output in terms of publications and data of our researchers than we would have working on acquiring content and making it available. So, from my perspective, oxymoronically, the future's not in the future anymore. It's actually here.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, okay. So I guess the comment is the future's almost all, we're always almost down the end of the road. So let's see what the comments of our panellists are on that. Who wants to start?
Yeah, I'll start. I agree. I wrote a line in our teaching and learning strategy that said we were going to prepare students for digital futures. And now I wish that I'd written it as we're going to prepare students for digital like now. And there is this, certainly in my area of digital, there's this habit of framing the digital as a future-y thing, when in actual fact it's already here. So in that sense, it's intriguing to me. I mean, I think, and you'll be well aware of, you'll know this inside out, I think what you're faced with is a cultural challenge in the sense of what people perceive a library to be. So I think there is that difficult job of reframing in your institution's minds what you've just described. I can remember, it's not that long ago that people were saying, oh, I think we'll put some computers in the library. And I read a tweet a few months ago that said, oh, we're going to put some books in the library as well as computers. Do you know what I mean? And that went bam, that flipped over about 20 years. But our cultural conception of the library is still what it is. So I think in response to your comment, yes, I agree. But what it means is that the task is kind of coming off the back of what I was saying previously. The task then is how do you reframe the cultural expectation of what a library is within the minds of the people around the library is then the challenge.
Yeah, I also agree, 100%. The future is now. And I think a key aspect is trust with respect to the organization, the larger institution. When I mentioned before that we will be taking on negotiations and the licensing of IT for the Max Planck, that wasn't something that we thought, oh my gosh, we have nothing to do, we've got to make ourselves relevant, what else could we do? That was actually, the Max Planck Institutes came to us, came to the library and said, you've done a fantastic job negotiating, why don't you take this over for us? Because they have that trust in our work. And I think this is, if we can provide value, they have trust in us as partners, then the institution will come to us for what they need.
Yes, well, I also agree with what you said. Of course, a lot of the things I described and Colleen and David described are already, we are already doing this. But still, I think it's good to talk about it because this presentation I did about a library without a catalogue was in 2011. We're 6 years further on the road, and I still work in a library offering its own catalogue. So I still have to talk to people inside the library about, well, the shift that's going on and the environment we're in at this moment.
Okay, so is it almost that the libraries are not aware of how far they are down the road, apart from obviously Liverpool?
Yeah, no, I think I'd agree. I think that again is a question of how you express your value and what you are. And it's interesting to me in terms of the language across the panel that quite often there's this sense of, well, the institution came to us and asked us to do X, Y, and Z. And I just wonder whether libraries should be going to the institution and saying, we can do these brilliant things. And just changing the flow of that sometimes, you know.
Yeah, any further comments on?
I will
Go on, Colleen, go on.
Yeah, I'll just throw in a little plug here, if I may. Talking about the future is now, and yes, in 2011, you were talking about a library without a catalog. How long have we been talking about open access? And 85% of research outputs are still behind a paywall. Yeah, I just want to throw that one out there.
But that's to do. I think the thing is that there's a distinction between what the technology affords and our perceptions of what's credible and authentic practice. And so we're still in a situation whereby behind paywall publications are more authentic in terms of academic credibility than open access, which is a real sadness to me. I think that's the case. And so until that shifts, I think we're going to be stuck in that loop. I genuinely don't understand why you can't write something and put it online and say, oh, now the whole world can look at it. I genuinely don't. But it's certainly in my career, it's troublesome because I put things, everything I do, basically everything I do, I want people to be able to Google to it because then it gets used. But it doesn't do me that many favors from a kind of credibility point of view. So I think that's the trouble there. And I think that's the reason why it's going slowly, is because that culture shift in terms of authenticity is much, much, much slower than what the technology actually allows us to do.
Certainly, that's part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the future's almost here, but going very slowly. Yes, okay. Right, I think we've got time for one final question over there.
Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. I think there's a lot you said that we wouldn't disagree with. I'm sorry, Stuart Hunt, University of Bristol. Thinking about David's point about authenticity struck me when we think about the changing nature of the scholarly record, which I think is what you're talking about, and this morning's notification from the spokesperson for the current incumbent in the White House, who has said that the tweets of that current incumbent should be taken as official communications from the White House. So it starts to make me think about where and how do we operate within that space where, to use your word, David, authenticity may or may not be an issue, and how do we, provenance, or how do we guide people around that space?
Right, okay, so I think the question is how do we manage to provide guidance or even operate in a space where scholarly communications are changing rapidly and are coming in very diverse forms. Our authenticity is perhaps not quite as easy to ascertain as it might have been in the past. So, who would like to pick that one up first?
Well, if I can pick that up. I mean, it's a troublesome situation in some senses because I think our trust used to be invested in institutions, and the digital disintermediates institutions towards the individual. So that's what's happening with Trump, is that he doesn't even have to go through his own government to say things, okay? So the government then has to scramble to catch up, but the fact is there's a massive impact there, and so you have to go with that, right? Because it's changing the way the world looks. So I think what it means, certainly from a student point of view, is that we used to have these very clear cultural markers of trust and credibility. So you'd say, well, if it came from that organisation, then it's probably okay. If it's in the library, it's probably okay. So I did have a brief conversation with a librarian a while ago, and I asked her the question, is it your job to make sure that everything in the library is kind of good stuff? And she said yes, which I thought was a really interesting perspective. I didn't know that that was the case. So what that means is that we have to equip people with much more sophisticated forms of critical evaluation, because they can't just go by these large, these institutional markers of trust and credibility. They actually have to engage with the substance of the source and go, does this work? Is this credible? Is this authentic? What's its provenance? And again, I had a really interesting discussion with a researcher a little while ago, and he said, look, it's easy for me. I'm an expert in my field. My information environment is these 5 journals. Okay, so I don't have to critically evaluate. The challenge is that it's the first year students, it's the people entering education that are in this massively complex information environment. And so this brings me back to my first point, where the library has to be a source of expertise and has to be able to teach people how to interpret and negotiate what is becoming a complex environment along the lines that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's not only a role of universities and university libraries. What you see happening in public libraries, for instance, is that they pick up this role as well, and they try to educate younger people to make them aware of all the information that's there and what it's worth. So it's all about educating people, little children, when they are young and when they start their journey on the World Wide Web. So it's not only a task for universities and university libraries.
Yeah,
it starts.
I agree.
Well, it starts at this moment. It starts when babies are born, because they are born with almost an iPad in their hands.
I think the kind of critical literacies that we used to teach second-year undergrads need to be taught to 6-year-olds.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because that's the information environment they're in.
Okay, that's an interesting. Colleen?
Yeah, yes, distinguishing what is authoritative is probably one of the gravest problems that our society is facing today, no doubt about that. I don't know if you read the study at Stanford University last year, where they tested third-year university students put in front of them different sources, and they failed abysmally. That they were not able to distinguish the authoritative sources from non-authoritative. Third-year university students at Stanford. This is absolutely a problem. I think your question or your comment also touched, I think, maybe very lightly on the concept of peer review also, which is another question that we need to be thinking about. And I don't have an answer in my role. I don't have an answer or a real comment to give there, but I think that one of the points is that it's a very difficult question, the concept of promotion and tenure when it comes to researchers and their outputs, and the importance of peer review and impact factor. And those are things that, though, go beyond the scope of right here in the UK. These are questions that need to be resolved on a much broader level, I think, on a global level, and I hope that there will be discussions at the global level to resolve that question.
Okay, thank you very much, Colleen. As always with good panel sessions, we're getting to the really interesting conversation. We've just run out of time. So I'd like if you could join me in a good SCONUL. Thank you very much to our panellists.